Welcome to the podcast. I hope you guys are having a great summer. We are having a blast recording lots and lots of episodes for you to enjoy during this beautiful summer. You can listen to us on your drive to the beach and when you're out and about. Today's episode is one that I'm very, very happy to bring to you. We have Dr. Gregory Canillas. We get a lot of emails from the guys who are in real dire situations. They're with a girlfriend or a wife that turned out to be psycho. Well, Dr. Canillas will help us, and this will help the guys that write in all the time. He will help us look for signs, questions to ask, things to look for in the early stages when you're dating. And these signs will give you a glimpse, a clue of what the future might be with this woman. This episode is very, very important. I think you will enjoy it. It was lots of fun to record. Dr. Canillas shared a lot of important information. You do not want to miss this episode. Before we get started, as always, I'd like to tell you about our sponsors. And today's episode is brought to us by RoanJewelry.com. You can find them at www.roanjewelry.com. They have great gifts for the special woman in your life. Make sure you check them out. When you support Roan Jewelry, you are supporting this podcast. Also on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Rob Aguilar Show, we have links, affiliate links to Amazon, to Onnit. Onnit makes some of the best supplements on the planet. I live by them. I use them all the time. I use the T Plus for working out, the Alpha Brain. It is a true nootropic that enhances your way of thinking. You see things more clear, not to mention the benefit of lucid dreaming. If you've never had a lucid dream, it is one of the coolest experiences you could ever have. It's when you can decide what goes on during the dream. In other words, you have total control over the dream, and it is crazy. So you should definitely check out Alpha Brain. You can find these links on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Rob Aguilar Show. Affiliate links to Amazon. Every time you shop at Amazon, use our affiliate link, bookmark it, use it over and over again. This is a great way to support the podcast. So we have this great conversation lined up. Stick around. You do not want to be left out.
From A1 Studios in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, New York, this is the Rob Aguilar Show.
Good morning, Dr. Gregory Canillas. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Rob.
So, Doctor, you are going to help us figure out this complex thing we like to call a woman's mind.
Okay.
And a lot of the emails and questions that we get from guys, they tell us about their current status in their relationships where it turns out that the woman that they're dating has gone psycho on them.
Mm-hmm.
Temper tantrums, violence, things getting thrown around. And they always wonder if there was ever any signs that they could have looked for early on in the relationship that could have told them, you know what, maybe you shouldn't go too deep into a relationship with this woman because there's something psycho about her. Mm-hmm. And, it'll save everyone a lot of heartache.
Okay.
So from your experience, is there anything that we can look for that will help us or give us a glimpse into the future with certain women?
Yeah, well, I've dealt with a lot of clients, both male and female, who are dating or in relationships, and there are always signs. I wouldn't necessarily say psycho, but there are signs that the relationship probably won't work out. And some of those signs are people will tell you early on, like on first dates, really who they are. So you have to be open to listening, I think, to who the person is. If they're telling you that they've stalked people before, that's probably not a good sign.
No, definitely not.
Right. If they're kind of needy, probably not a good sign. One of the things I found quite a bit in terms of relationships with clients is that family of origin, history with family is really important and is really a good sign to tell you that who this person is and the relationship might not be so good. So, for example, if you're dating someone and they tell you on a first date or, a couple of dates into the relationship or dating, that they don't get along with their parents, that's probably a sign that you're going to have some problems in the relationship.
That is very interesting.
I can tell you, like, for example, a few clients who have talked about early on dating folks and, asking questions. Guys will ask questions about a woman's background, how do you get along with your family? And if they tell you, I don't like my parents, I don't get along with my parents, or I haven't spoken to my parents in some time, that usually is a clue that it's not going to turn out so well. And that has to do a lot with psychological stuff and theory, and a lot to do with family of origin issues. So if people are not really attached or connected to their parents, it's going to be really hard for them to be in a relationship.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's very interesting because I think our first bond as children is with our parents.
Exactly.
And I think, for example, with boys, there's always a strong bond with the mother early on. Mm-hmm. I see it with my child. My son is only 18 months, but he is like attached to his mom. Like his mom mm-hmm. is his world. And when he's feeling sick, I will come by and maybe try to pick him up, and he'll be open to that. Mm-hmm. But then he wants mom. And when he's with her and he's feeling sick, then he feels better. It's really interesting, that strong bond.
Yeah.
So if someone is saying that they don't have a good relationship with their parents, then something during that bonding process, maybe as children, didn't take place or wasn't healthy. Can we assume that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different in every case, but I think you can assume that if there was not a really good attachment when the person was young, that's probably going to create some problems down the line. Because the parents are the first people that love us. So if we don't feel like we're loved by our parents, it's going to be hard for us to love other people, to take in love and to give it. So it could be the attachment. It could be as kids are growing up, if there are issues within the family. I know sometimes it's not always attachment. Kids were attached when they were younger, but when they hit adolescence, there might have been some issues, or parents divorced and they didn't have access to a parent, or, a parent may remarried and it created some problems. A lot of times it comes out later on for people. They're not necessarily conscious of it. And so a lot of times it will come out when people are in therapy with me or other therapists.
Now, what if a woman says that her father wasn't around? Is that cause for concern?
Sometimes. So, again, I think it depends on the person. But sometimes people have other people that can step in, like an uncle or grandfather, and they can provide support and they can be a good, male role model. But other times it might be that does create a problem. And so if a person didn't have access to one parent, and this is true for men too, it's not just women, but if the person didn't have access to one of the parents and they don't feel like there's a connection, it could create problems in romantic relationships.
I've read things where, for example, let's say it's a household where there's no dad present, mm-hmm. let's say, and a girl grows up with her mom. Mm-hmm. And usually the first example of a relationship is, again, our parents.
Exactly.
So if there was never, I guess, a benchmark to kind of, or a standard to kind of set to, when a woman grows up and tries to go into a relationship, she doesn't have anything to base what her relationship should be like. Mm-hmm. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say yes. I would say that there's some truth to that, definitely. If you because a lot of things that we learn we're influenced by our family. It's modeled by our parents. So good behavior, bad behavior, a lot of times we pick that up from our parents. And so if you witness like a loving, affectionate relationship between your parents, I think you have a better chance of having that in your own relationship. That's not to say, though, that everybody that doesn't have access to both parents is going to not be able to create a relationship that's good and healthy. But I think certainly having that model makes a difference.
So we shouldn't necessarily run for the hills when a woman on the first date is telling you, I don't really get along with my mom and my dad wasn't really around.
Not always, but it's not usually a good sign now. So I think guys need to ask, more questions about that. Because sometimes people have had that experience, women may have had that experience, and they process that experience. They've gone to therapy, they're insightful, they gain insight through other ways, and they kind of know what their issues are, and so they know what the triggers are. And so when they're in relationships, if issues come up, they can talk that out with their partner. They can talk it out with their boyfriend. But if they don't know that, if they also don't have self-awareness, I think you have a problem.
Now, what else should we look for?
Again, I said like neediness. Like if somebody's really needy, that's not necessarily a good sign. If they've cheated before, I'm doing some work on infidelity in men and women. And usually if people tell you that, that's not such a good sign. They'll sometimes try to make excuses for it. I cheated because, my boyfriend wasn't there or my girlfriend wasn't there. But that's not necessarily always the truth. And so if people have that history, oftentimes that history is repeated. So if a girl tells a guy that on a first date, that's not necessarily a good sign.
In your research, there's been a long time theory or hypothesis that men and women cheat for different reasons. But sometimes when we break that down, I don't know if that's necessarily true because, we're both similar in many ways, men and women, that maybe at the core center, there is no difference in the reasoning why men cheat, women cheat. Is there any truth to that?
I think a lot of the research says that women cheat for emotional reasons. There's something missing in their relationship with their husband, their boyfriend, partner. And so they will seek out another person to fill that emotional void. Whereas the literature will say that men cheat for physical reasons, that there's an attraction to another woman, and they'll step out on the relationship for that reason. I think it's a combination of both. And I think we're seeing that it's both for both sexes, that there are certainly men who have things that are missing in their relationship, a connection, and so they'll seek out another woman for that reason. And there are certainly women who I think seek out other relationships outside of their relationship for sexual reasons and not just for intimacy.
So there are definitely some similarities. There's also, and this is a lot of the guys will use this excuse that it's in the male biology, that it's in the male DNA to not be with one woman, that it's our animalistic instinct to be with many women. Now, I don't know if that's the way they justify what they do, or that there is some truth to that.
Well, there's different research out there, and so some of the research says that we're not monogamous creatures, male or female, and so that what we're doing when we enter into marriages really isn't necessarily natural. However, society's rules and things like that, I think, come into play. And when people make a commitment, I think most people expect that commitment is going to be honored. But there are different kinds of relationships out there, too. There's some people that are have open relationships where both partners are cool with that. If that's the case, then that's something different. But yeah, I think there's research to support that most people might not be monogamous. It's that we choose to be for religious, societal reasons, etc.
Because in the animal kingdom, no animals are really faithful, I guess, the way humans are, or try to be faithful, or try to be monogamous. And maybe we're just doing something against what we were intended to do. It should be one big free-for-all, maybe.
I don't know. That's a good question, Rob. I'm not sure. I think it depends though on like what the partners decide. So if they decide that it's going to be an open relationship or a polyamorous relationship, if the partner's okay with it, then I think that's fine. I'm not one to judge. That's therapists don't usually do that. So if that's what floats the person's boat, then by all means, do what makes you happy. But I think you also have to consider like societal stuff and, pressures and all of those things. And that, if people are expecting to be monogamous in their relationships, then I think that has to be honored too, if that makes sense.
Another fear that men seem to have is once you're in the relationship, and I know you said you wouldn't call it psycho, the guys that listen to the show will call these women psycho women or psycho chicks.
Right.
Once they're in the relationship with these women, they say that it's almost difficult to get out because the woman will make it difficult. How do you let someone down when you want to get out? And it's just like I wish I had some of the emails in front of me, but some of these guys are so desperate to get out, they don't know how to get out. It sounds kind of funny because we usually in mainstream media we'll hear women who can't get out of an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
But some of these guys have been attacked. There was just one of the guys who wrote in once that he broke up with this girl because she was jealous. She was going through his phone, his computer, and he just couldn't take that anymore. And he broke up with her. And he was walking down, crossing the street one day, and she almost ran him over. That's how angry she was.
Okay.
It almost becomes difficult to get away once you're in. How do you handle someone who's gone to that point where it's just, I mean, maybe just call the cops, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same as with women who find themselves in similar situations. And you mentioned something, and I think those are two signs also. Like if someone also tells you that they're very jealous, or they're very angry, or they get angry and they'll give you scenarios about things that have happened in previous relationships, those are also signs too. But I think you have to do what I deal with a lot of domestic violence. I teach that. Actually, I've been teaching that class for 10 years at one of the universities where I work, and it's the same whether the victim or survivor is male or female. If you feel threatened, even as a man, you need to, call the police, make that known. Men typically don't like to do that because there's a lot of stigma attached to it, or sometimes they don't have really good interactions with the police who, will kind of say things like, well, you're a man up. You should be able to deal with this. But if, somebody's being stalked, if they're being harassed, if they're being, run over by a car, or, somebody's intimidated to do that, then that's a call for you to, seek out police, seek out legal help.
The scary thing about situations like that is that's when tragedies occur.
Yeah.
Someone ultimately ends up getting hurt, whether it's the woman who's trying to hurt the guy, or the guy's maybe trying to defend himself, and then it just gets really, really ugly. So, which now I think is a good segue to go into these different personalities that people have. And so I guess we kind of covered that there are certain issues that maybe might have taken place when people are growing up. But our personalities, are we born with our own personalities? Or is it a series of things that we learn growing up that form our personalities and who we are?
I think it's both, honestly. I think that people come here with, their own personalities. In a family, you can certainly have several kids who have the same mom and dad, and they have completely different personalities. One person might be quiet, one person might be more outgoing, but have the same parents, have the same upbringing. We're also influenced by, family's values, what's modeled for us, our relationships with peers. So sometimes in the same family, people might have had different peer relationships that have formed their personality. So I think it's a combination of both. I think there's some biological stuff. I think people come with their personality. And I think there's some things that we learn from our parents, from whomever is raising us.
I guess if we're born with our personalities, and let's say you're dealing with a child that maybe is short-tempered, I guess the time to tweak that is when they're children.
Absolutely.
Because my objective has always been, I mean, it's great that we have doctors like yourself to help us when we're adults to correct the things that I guess were screwed up as kids, whether it was our parents or our surroundings. And it's great that we have doctors to help us with that. But my goal has always been, I want to raise my son so that he doesn't have to need therapy, and that we don't screw him up so that he needs to spend years in therapy to fix everything we messed up. So I guess when we see that, it's when we have to correct it. How do you correct something like that? Let's say a child who for no reason is throwing temper tantrums.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you have to correct that early on. One of my areas of specialization is that I'm a child adolescent psychologist. And so that is one of the populations that I actually like to work with the most, because you actually see change. With adults, it's a little bit harder. If you've been doing the same thing for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're kind of set in your ways. But with kids, if you can kind of break that early on, you're correct, Rob. I think you can make an impact and, prevent kids from maybe having to go to therapy, or maybe having some of these issues that we were talking about earlier with dating. But Early on, you want to deal with that. As a parent, you want to set really firm boundaries. If you're having trouble as a parent dealing with that yourself, then it's a good idea to like seek outside help, like from a therapist. I've worked with a lot of families who have kids who have some of the issues that you're talking about, or have ADHD, or are acting out in class and at home, and you really want to try to nip that in the bud as early on as possible, so that that kid has a good corrective experience and it impacts their behavior in a positive way.
And I guess the same thing could be said for other different types of traits. I've heard parents who will say that the child or their child is shy. Mm-hmm. It's a shy child, that they're not necessarily hanging out with the other children in class. Uh-huh. They tend to be by themselves. All these different things, temper tantrums, shyness, things like that. There is hope for parents who are dealing with this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, they just need to, I think, address it. Parents, I think, need to also be really open with their kids. And one of the things I think is not always modeled in families is open communication. So most families, most parents don't necessarily model really open communication between themselves or with their kids, but they're being really open with their kids, and they're talking to their kids early on about issues, how they're doing at school, who their friends are. It prevents a lot of the problems that I would see later on in like adolescence or early adulthood. So if you're talking to your kids about like their experiences at school, and they're telling you, like, for example, they're bullied, I mean, that's a time when a parent can intervene. But oftentimes parents don't know that because they're not even asking those questions, and kids aren't necessarily going to tell you that without you, somewhat prying. So I think it's a good idea for parents to really model that early on. It makes a world of difference.
A lot of the mistakes that parents make is that and my wife and I see it when we take our son to the park, mm-hmm. or to a music class, or to one of the things that he's involved in, that they tend, and maybe I don't think they do it on purpose. I think it's just something that comes very natural, that they label their children, mm-hmm. in a certain category. Mm-hmm. And like the reason why I brought like shyness and temper tantrums and things like that is that I've seen parents at the park, oh, my boy, he's shy. Mm-hmm. He's a shy one. He's quiet. He's to himself. And I think that a child begins to hear that, and he automatically maybe puts himself in that category. Well, I'm shy. Mm-hmm. Or the other parent who's scolding his kid, I don't want to, you're doing a temper tantrum, you're being mean, you're being a bad boy. Mm-hmm. And I think they hear that over and over, and then they begin to live up to the label that maybe their own parent has given them.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I've seen that often in my work with children and families. Sometimes the parents will give kids labels, and they become that. So the shy one, the bad one, the black sheep, and then kids, will actually become that. So it's not always a good idea to label kids, but to talk to them about issues, I think, is really a good thing. So, for example, you mentioned like a kid who's shy. It's not always shyness. Sometimes it's introversion, which is a little bit different from shyness. So, there are extroverts, people that are more outgoing, more gregarious, like the life of the party kind of folks. And then there are people that are more reserved, more observant, and it may be that, not necessarily shyness. And it's just two ways of being that are different. So it's not necessarily a negative, but sometimes parents will make it a negative.
And they might do it not knowing so. They're just, yes. Oh, he's shy. So now let's say a child has gone through all that, and now they're a little screwy because mom and dad did the wrong things. And they become teenagers, they become adults, and then they're out in the real world, and they're having struggles with work, uh-huh. with relationships, because of all the things that occurred in their childhood. They were born with a certain personality, and then things they learned at home added to that. And now they're seeking help. Now they're going to someone like yourself, mm-hmm. looking for help to help them. They want to be successful. They want to be happy. And they want to do and correct all the things, all the shortcomings that they think they have because of the experiences in life. Can someone change their personality or their way of being when they've been doing the same thing for years, when they were taught to be a certain way because they were labeled, mm-hmm. because they were born with a certain personality? As adults, can we tweak that and change it, or do people simply do not change and this is the hand that you were dealt with and that's what you got to deal with?
No, I think people can absolutely change. I think that's one of the positives about the work that I do is you can see people, even as adults, make significant changes, but they have to be willing to want to do the work. So sometimes people will tell you they want to make changes, but they really don't want to do the work, or they will gain insight, but not necessarily change the behavior. So there are lots of people who are very insightful about what's going on with them. Like you said, they may be, to use a non-technical term, a little screwy, but they might, have some psychological issues, I'll say. And if they want to change that, they can. Oftentimes, again, they'll get insight through therapy or through their own work, through introspection, through talking to pastor, priest, friends, whatever, works for that person. But they won't be able to necessarily change their behavior. And without the behavior change, you don't see the change that you're talking about. So, for example, if somebody is using drugs, I've had a lot of clients who are on drugs. They'll participate in like 12-step. They may even go through rehab. They have some insight. They know maybe it's connected to family of origin issues, like the issues that we were talking about earlier, but they don't make the behavioral change. They don't stop using drugs, or they don't stay away from people who are a bad influence, who are, still in the drug scene. Without that behavioral change, you really don't see the change that you're talking about. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, that behavioral change, that sounds like it's an uphill battle. It sounds difficult. I mean, you're changing behavior that was embedded in you for years.
Yes.
And it's got to be difficult.
It is. It is very difficult for people to make changes, whether that's in relationships or whether it has to do with drugs and alcohol or any of the things that we've been talking about. But I think if people are conscious about it, they're aware of it, and they actively make steps towards doing that, it's possible. But with substance abuse, for example, there's a lot of talk about this in the literature, and you see it when you're working with people with substance abuse issues. People move forward and they move backward. They move forward, they move backward. It's called relapse, and it's well known to be a part of recovery with substance abuse. But honestly, I think I've seen that with every other issue. It's not just limited to substance abuse. People who, let's say we were talking earlier about dating and relationships. People tend to attract the same kind of people. I don't think we talked about that earlier. But,
that's actually a great point that you bring up. But please go on.
Yeah, so they tend to attract the same kind of people. So guys that might be emailing you, talking to you about like women who are crazy or psycho, to use the terms that they were using, oftentimes if you really ask them, they're attracting the same person every time.
I actually have friends like that. I'm like, you didn't learn from the last time.
Right.
And it's just, one type of woman over and over, like the needy woman over and over again. And
right.
Text messages like nonstop, and this guy can't even breathe. Wow, it's crazy. But yeah, I see exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
It goes the same thing with women. They complain that guys are douchebags, and they continue to date the same kind of guys.
Guy.
I'm like,
right,
same guy, just different name, different dude, different area, but same douchebag.
Same exact guy. Right, exactly. But
why is that?
That's the part that isn't the behavior change. So they might be aware of it. They're talking about it. They're like, yeah, I date this guy. He's a douchebag. This other one's a douchebag. But they haven't connected that to the behavior change. So they haven't started to change the behavior. Like when they start dating, they're not asking the questions that we were talking about earlier, and they get into the same kind of relationship. They do the same behavior, if that makes sense. They're not just using the insight that they've gained from dating the same person over and over again, or talking to friends about it. And everybody's pointed out the pattern, but they haven't changed the behavior. And that's actually what changes. So people can change, but they have to be willing to connect the insight to the behavior change.
Yeah, it's almost like they refuse to be happy. Like they're miserable with these kind of guys. Let's say the women that date these kind of guys. And they complain about it. and they'll break up and they'll get another one just like the last one. And it's like, well, that guy made you unhappy, and this guy's just like the last one.
Yeah.
It's confusing. It's confusing that they do that to themselves.
Yeah, but I think you hit the nail on the head. I think people sometimes they say they want certain things, but then they do things that clearly show that they're sabotaging themselves. So there's lots of clients that I've worked with. There are lots of people that I've known personally who have said that they want to be happy in a relationship, but they pick somebody who necessarily won't make them happy. And again, that goes back to like family of origin issues, goes back to self-esteem and self-concept issues. It's usually a lot more complicated. And again, that's why I think therapy can come in really handy and help people. I was listening to an interview you did with Maureen Shea, the boxer, and she was talking about therapy and her own journey. And,
Yes.
I think that's really important for a lot of people to understand. There's a lot of stigma around therapy, especially in like communities of color. Lots of people in communities of color will say we don't do that. We don't talk about our problems outside the home. What happens in this house stays in this house. You probably heard that a lot. I heard that growing up.
All the time. People are afraid of therapy. And like you said, in different ethnic groups or ethnic backgrounds, in the Latino culture, myself being Latino, that if ever that came up in a conversation, you should go see a therapist. Well, only crazy people go to therapists.
Right.
I'm not crazy. I'm not going to the therapist.
Exactly.
I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a machismo thing. People are afraid of the therapist, and they shouldn't. I think it should be something that we embrace, that if this will help us live happier lives. I mean, ultimately, that's the goal. We're here for, when you really think about it, we're here on Earth for such a short time. I know like people in my family on my mother's side, my grandmother lived to be 108.
Oh, wow.
My grandfather lived to be 90 something. My grandmother had gone beyond 100 years. Her mind was like intact. It was perfect. I would still get birthday cards, Christmas cards from her.
Oh, wow.
Really a fascinating woman. But something that she said later on in her life when she was beyond 100 years old was, she told me, Robert, you need to live your life and live it the happiest that you can because life is short. And I said to myself, my grandmother's over 100 years old and she's telling me that life is short. Someone who's lived over 100 years is telling me that life is short. So the average American life is 70 something, 80 years old.
Yes.
It's even 100 years is too short. So ultimately the goal is to be happy, to make the best of it while we're here.
Absolutely.
And if therapy can help people live happy and healthier lives, then we should be all for it.
I agree. But I know there's stigma. I mean, there's still stigma attached to it in lots of communities, and the Latino community, African American, Asian American, Middle Eastern, etc. A lot of times we don't go to seek out therapists because of the stigma. But you're right. I mean, if it will help you to live a better life, it will help you to live a happier life. It will help you to uncover some of the deeper issues that might be motivating some of the behaviors, then yeah, I think people should seek it out. Totally agree.
Fantastic. Dr. Gregory Canillas, this was such a great conversation, one of my favorites ever.
Thank you.
That I would definitely love to do this again, and maybe we can pick some topics that we can touch on, and if you're open to it, I would love to have you back on. And
absolutely.
Is there anywhere where people can reach out to you if they have questions, or do you have a website, or where can people interact with you on social media?
Sure. So my Facebook is Gregory Canillas. Last name is Canillas. On Twitter, I'm Dr. GJ Canillas. And IG, Dr. C9, number 9. And then I'm an assistant professor at the Chicago School, and I can be reached by email at gcanillas@thechicagoschool.edu.
Dr. Canillas, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for this valuable information.
Thanks, Ron.
I think this will help answer a lot of the questions the guys send in. And it's very important that first date, as you pointed out, is crucial to ask the right questions. And some of those questions might raise a red flag, and it means it's maybe something that you don't want to get involved in. So I appreciate that, and I'm sure the guys listening also appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Canillas. And again, I'd love to have you back.
I'd love to come back. Definitely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
This has been an A1 Broadcasting podcast.